Hello everyone. So whenever beginners are working with Java and whenever they're working with object-oriented programming, most of the time they face a common error and common issue whenever they're working with static methods and working with non-static variables and static variables as well. So a common error that they often face is the Java non-static variable cannot be referred from a static concept. So this error most of the time the beginners often face whenever they're working with static variables and non-static variables. So uh, in this video, I'm going to show you why this error actually happening and how this error can be solved. So let's get on with the code first, and I'll show you how this error actually happens and how this error can be solved. So let us first erase this one. Okay, and uh, I'll remove this one and I'm going to create a new class. So let's say I'm going to create a student class. Okay, and I'm also going to create a student test class. So student test class will be my main method. Okay, minimize that, split it right so that we can easily understand it. Great. Okay, so in the student class, let me first initialize some instance variable. So let's me declare, let's say we're going to take the names of the students, so name, and then we're also going to take the IDs of the student. So yeah, so let's keep it simple. We're going to take two variables, so two data. So these name and IDs, these are the instance variable. We obviously know that instance variables are the variables from the class. So let me now write down the constructor. So here's a constructor. So the constructor is going to take two arguments. Say, and for name, and for the ID, let's say ID. Okay, great. So obviously we're going to store the values here. So the name is equals to n. I'm not explaining all of this because those who have already worked with object-oriented programming, most of them know about the instance variable, the constructor, and how the constructor take the values from the objects. So this ID. Okay, great. So in the main method, let's say, okay, so we have declared the main method. Let us create an object of the student class. Let's say student say s1 is equals to new student, and obviously we're going to give the two parameters. So first of all, the name, let's say name John, and then the ID, let's say the ID is 101. Okay, let's keep it simple. All right, so now if we want to see the information of this S1 object, so basically here S1 is an object. In other words, we can also say it at instance. So many people get confused about the word instance and object. Actually, both of them are same. So sometimes I may use the term instance and sometimes I may use the term object. So don't get confused about it. All right. So let's create a method. Let's say void info. So obviously this method is a non-static method. So let me just clarify by writing it non-static info. All right. Okay, and let me just print out the informations. Let's say we're going to print out the names. So let's say name, and we're going to print out the ID. Okay. Right. So obviously we know that whenever we are calling an method, we need to call, if we are calling a non-static method, so we need to call a non-static method with the help of an object, right? With the help of an instance. So here the instance of the object is S1. So we need to call it through S1 object. So let's say S1 dot non-static info. So if we print this, I'm sorry, let me run. Okay, so as you can see here, it exactly prints what we want, the name John and ID 101. So here we are using actually a non-static method. So, but what happens if we use a static method and if we want to access the non-static variables? All right, and let's create a static method. Okay. So for creating a static method, we need to use the keyword static, and let's void, let's say static info. All right, static info. And I'm going to print this to statement here as well, and let's see what actually happens. All right, so it's already showing an error here, and obviously let's see what there is. Now we all know that to access a static method, we do not need an object. Because static methods are methods from the class, we can access this with the help of the class as well. So let's call the class, I'm sorry, this class is student. All right, so student dot static info. All right, so let's see what actually happens here. Okay, see, so here we are seeing that the error is here. So the error is showing that non-static variable name cannot be referenced from a static context. So what does this actually mean? So it means that name is a non-static variable and we are calling it through a static method named static info. So we cannot use a static method to access a non-static variable, and that is how static methods actually work. So but can we not use it actually? Can we really not access non-static variables? Actually we can. But first of all, why normally we cannot access the non-static variables? Because non-static variables are part of the class variables. So you need to for accessing it, you need to access it through an object, whereas static methods are do not need to be accessed through objects. So that's why the static methods cannot access non-static variables. However, we can access the static methods can access the non-static variables, but there are some procedures. So let's see what are the methods or what are the ways we can access the non-static variables in a static method. So actually there are two ways mainly. Okay, let me just remove these things. All right, so basically there are two ways where we can access the non-static variables through a static method. Number one is that we can pass the variables as arguments, like variables as arguments in the static method. Also, there is another way. So the second way is And this is one is the better way actually whenever you are doing a project. So this is the more preferred way, is that you use the instance. So you use the instance. You already know instance means object. Use the instance of the class to access the non-static variable. So now how does this thing actually work? We're going to see. So obviously we're not going to see this one because this is not an efficient way. This one is the more efficient way. So we're going to see how we can use an instance, or we can use an object of the class to access the non-static variables. So we obviously know that the instance variables can be called through an object, but how can we use that object in a static method? So it's quite simple. So let's see. Let me just remove these things first. So for the easiness, let me just put it all in a single code. Right, so I'm going to ignore this one. So I'm going to delete this one. All right, so only this one will remain. Okay, so here let me just comment out this one because we'll not be needing this one. So we don't also need the constructor. Okay, we might need the constructor. Let's see. Okay, so we'll be dealing with the static info. So this static info method. So how does this actually work? So here what we're going to do is that we're going to use the object. So what is our object? The object is S1, right? So we are going to use the S1 object as an argument of this static method. So S1 will be the argument of the static method. So obviously we need to define the object type of the argument. So it is a student type. Okay, here. So whenever we are using the object as an argument, so what actually happens here is that the object already has an access to this instance variable. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to use this object to call these variables. So s1.name, s1.id, and so let's just comment out this one. And here all we need to do is that we need to call the static method and we need to call the object here. So what we're actually doing here is that, let me just use my pencil. All right, so what we're actually doing here is that we're using the object, and we are using this object as an argument in the static method. And since the object already has access to these instance variables, so all we need to do is that we need to call this instance variable through this objects in this static method. And we're going to call the static method and we're going to use the parameter s1 here. So this way our static method can easily access the non-static variables. So let's see what the result is. Okay, so we need to remove these parts. So, right, okay. See, so the code is actually running. So here, since the code is running, we can see that the, okay, let me just remove these things. Since the code is running, we can actually see that this static method, the static info method, is actually accessing the static variables, the name, ID, so through an object s1. So this way we can actually use the static method to access the non-static variables. So I hope this is an easy one. And you, all of you who are having this issue with the error of non-static variables cannot be accessed through static methods, can be solved now. Thank you.